All right, welcome back to Conversations with Daniel, a funeral director. Today, I have the honor of speaking with Maria, and I've already forgotten how to pronounce her last name.
Giannotti.
Maria Giannotti. So, tell me a little bit about yourself. But actually, before you do that, I got a little icebreaker question for you.
Okay.
Which, in our preamble before we started this conversation, you were telling me your Italian heritage.
Yes.
In Giannotti, obviously, Italian name. Now, is there a favorite dish that you like to make?
There are lots of Italian dishes, lots of favorite dishes. One of my favorites goes back to my dad. I invented a new way of making cannelloni.
Oh.
And I have a secret recipe for it. And instead of using the pasta, like Italians make pasta and roll it, I use egg roll wrappers. And
Really?
my dad
Wow.
called it Lazy Mary cannelloni, and that's what it is. Lazy Mary cannelloni, fastest cannelloni you'll ever make, and it tastes delicious.
What do you stuff it with?
Ricotta usually.
Yes.
Yeah, ricotta and some parmesan, and it's actually going to be one of the recipes. I'm starting a new group I'll talk about after, but it's one of the recipes I'm going to teach my bereavement group to make.
Awesome.
In honor of my dad, who has passed.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Maybe we'll get your recipe.
Absolutely.
It sounds simple though. I like
it's
it.
very simple.
Yeah.
And fast.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sure. So you wear several hats.
I do.
One of them is a spiritual care practitioner for hospice.
Correct.
Right. So what is a spiritual care practitioner? What does that mean? What does it involve?
So a spiritual care practitioner is sometimes called a chaplain.
Okay.
But spiritual care practitioners or providers are part of an interdisciplinary team, and they provide the spiritual and emotional support to the families that come into hospice.
Wow.
We have a process that we go through. Many people who work in spiritual care are either have master's degrees in some kind of counseling or spiritual care, or they have something called clinical pastoral education. It's a very specific kind of education for chaplains.
Okay, excellent. Is that what you have?
I do not have clinical pastoral education, but I have a master's degree in pastoral ministry.
Okay.
And I also have a master's degree in clinical ethics.
Oh,
so I'm a clinical ethicist as well.
Okay.
And I've worked in this area for the last 30 years. I used to be director of spiritual care at Hotel de Grace for a good number of years. And prior to that, I did supportive care at the Cancer Center.
Wow. That's really significant work.
I loved that work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
it's amazing.
That's like even what you do with hospice right now, like that's so significant because what a sensitive time for people and what they're going through, and to be able to provide that support, which is really, really needed.
It is an honor to work with the dying. It really is, and with families. You know that saying, if you can find a job, if you can work for something that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Yeah. This is what I do here. Like, don't tell anybody I do this for free, but I'm glad I'm being paid for it too.
Well, you deserve to be paid.
I know.
Actually, it's interesting. I was talking with a gentleman today who was in a motorcycle accident, and he said it happened so fast.
Yeah. And
when he came to, he thought, did I die? But and all of a sudden he had he said it was just such an impact that hit him when he thought maybe he died.
Wow.
Or if he didn't die, maybe he was dying. Luckily he didn't.
Oh,
he had a pretty good injury. I won't share it just to keep confidentiality, but he said the impact that had on him, he was just left like thinking and dwelling on his life. And
it's an awakening, right? It's like, I'm not immortal. This happens. And I think when you say that, I think that happens when people get a diagnosis as well.
Yes.
It's
I would imagine
it's this boom. All of a sudden, I've got this news now.
Wow.
I don't know what to do with that, right?
Yeah.
And yet, you feel like your whole world's just falling apart, but you still have to continue living life, knowing that there is an end game now, right? That there's an end point.
Wow. Now, with the work that you do, What's the vision that you have for the people that you serve and the community that you serve?
So my work at hospice, what my vision for what I do there is to basically meet people where they are, and to support the family and that patient or that resident that comes into our residential home with whatever needs they have, right? And so when we talk about spiritual care, I think people misunderstand that to be a religious care. Right?
Okay.
And so if we think about spirituality as an umbrella,
Right.
there's a lot of practices under spirituality.
Yeah.
It could be that you love to be out in nature. It could be that you do meditation. It could be that you do yoga. It could be that you're Catholic and you go to church every Sunday.
Right.
It could be a million different things. And we all have a spirituality. And religion is part of that spirituality. It is the way we live out our spirituality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that one of the things I notice is when people first come into hospice and they ask, do you want spiritual care? A lot of people say, no thanks,
Okay.
I'm good.
Okay.
But the reality is, we all have a spiritual way of being. And
Right.
so that might be that I bring you gnocchi one day because you love cooking. Or it may be that every day you get ice cream, you know.
Yeah.
Or you want to go for a walk outside and watch the birds. You know,
Right.
all of that is part of the spiritual care, as well as rituals and faith traditions and all of that stuff too.
Great. That's great. That's a really wonderful answer. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
There's so much to unpack with
Yeah.
what you just said that it was almost too much for me to digest. I'm gonna have to think that through, and I'm glad you shared that, because even with that spiritual care aspect, like I was reading a good book recently, and he was talking about just taking those pleasures in life and thanking God for them.
Yeah.
And that's like kind of relating to what you were talking about with the spiritual care, is like, you know, the gnocchi, that can be actually very impactful for someone's spirit. And as funny as that sounds, but
Not at all.
no, eh?
So can I share a story with you?
Please do.
So a while back, we had a patient who came in, and he had lived on his own, and him and his dog lived together, and he ended up in hospice. Italian man, and no offense to our volunteer chefs, but you know, Tim Hortons soup wasn't cutting it for him, and he was talking about he missed his food, and I said, well, what is it that you love? And he said, I love gnocchi. And so I said, I'm bringing you gnocchi tomorrow. And he looked at me like I was crazy, like, yeah, sure you are. And I made this gnocchi for him, and his daughter told me, I don't know how many times she's told me already, you have no idea what that gnocchi meant to my dad.
Wow.
You have no idea what that gnocchi meant to my dad. Thank you so much. And it was a memory that she keeps because it just lifted his spirit, right? And it was a bowl of food, and it's an amazing kind of thing. I have another story for you too.
Please do.
So when we talk about spirituality, right? One of my very first residents that I dealt with, she was Roman Catholic, and of course, I do the whole thing. Oh, would you like communion? And yes, all that. But she was not feeling like it was giving her some solace, but there was something missing. And so she loved to be outside. So she asked me, would you I just want to be outside. And I'm like, listen, let's figure this out. So I asked the nurses, can I take her outside? And they go, oh yeah, sure. Yeah. We put her in a wheelchair, and I'm giving her a tour of the gardens of the whole place, and she kept going, can you go farther? So we finally make it to the street, and I said, listen, we're not Thelma and Louise, we ain't doing the jump here. And she goes, she saw the church right kitty corner from hospice, and she said, I went to that church all my life. And I went, do you want to go? And she says, yeah. Wow. So I wasn't sure if I broke the rules. I probably did. We wheeled her over to the church. It was closed. It was a pandemic. We sat under the statue that was there. We picked flowers. We made a big bouquet of flowers from the church. And we were joking, and I said, I think we're going to have to go to confession. We're stealing the flowers. And she was laughing. Yeah, she was laughing, right? So we come back, and as we're walking back along the side, it was October, the neighbors had pumpkins growing out of the fence, and we stole pumpkins. And so,
given the circumstances, I think they'd be forgiving.
So we went back to her room, we're decorating the pumpkins, and we're going, okay, do you think we have to go to confession because we're stealing flowers and pumpkins? And she laughed so hard. It was just the best time. That lifted her spirits, and she appreciated it. It made life normal for her again, right? And so that's part of the deal. Sorry, I have a lot of stories. I apologize.
Hey, stories are awesome. That's the best way of communicating a message so many times is through a story.
Yeah.
And to provide a bowl of soup or a dish of gnocchi to someone who's suffering is like so meaningful. And
it's the small things, right? It's the small things.
Now, I just thought of something. For those who might not know what hospice means, what is hospice?
Oh, that's a loaded question. That's a lot.
Is it? I didn't think it was a big question, but
it's a big question. Yeah. So hospice palliative care, at our hospice, our residential home, so the program is very large, right? We have something called PMP, which are the physicians and nurses that go out into the community and provide hospice care at home for families. Which is awesome. It's amazing. And our staff is just unbelievable. One of our physicians won an award just recently, Dr. Bergeron, for her work in palliative care. But so there's a number of programs. So we have the physician nurse PMP, they call it, out in the community. We have the residential home.
So the very core of what hospice is, I would think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's caring for someone who has received critical diagnosis and also providing that support to their family.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So for someone who has the diagnosis that they will be dying, then they can go and receive hospice care. So
the hospice residential home, people are admitted with a timeline of 3 months or less. Right. And so that's who I usually work with. I do community work, but that's the majority of people, families and people, residents who come into our home.
Okay. Yeah. Now, for someone who receives that life-altering diagnosis, what is the emotional and spiritual guidance that you might start with?
That's a tough question because the short answer is this: I meet them where they're at, right? We address the needs that they have. So before I can give any kind of guidance or support, I really have to develop a relationship with you. Like I said, when they say, do you want spiritual care? Oh, no, thanks. So, but when I go in and I bring them coffee in the morning, or they love crullers, so I steal the crullers out of the Tim Hortons thing and make sure they get their cruller. Developing that relationship with them is the important part. And then once they can trust me, that's when we start, I bring them their coffee, and over the coffee and the cruller, they start talking about their emotions and their feelings. So, you just help them come to terms with what they're feeling, give them a safe space to really talk about it. I'm more of I want to say I'm a non-anxious presence. I am a listening presence. Just being present to someone is what I think spiritual care is about. Do I give them a whole lot of guidance? Yeah, that's up to them to say, yeah, she gave me some good guidance. Yeah. I just feel like I'm present.
True. Actually, that's awesome. One of the things in studying grief support is that just being there with the person is one of the biggest supports.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's a scripture that says, like, bear one another's burdens. And I think about that, and what does that mean? Or share the burden. And if someone is really burdened, usually they're weighed down, they're heavy. You have to get down next to them.
Exactly.
And share that with them. And that's the best type of support, the best type of comfort is just to be there next to somebody, to be there with them through what they're going through. And once in a while, you might have an opportunity to say something or do something that can help really lift their spirits. But the biggest support is just being next to them.
And I think that when people are ill and we go in with a brave face, right? The family goes in with a brave face. They don't want to upset them.
Yeah.
They don't want to acknowledge the fact that they're dying,
Right.
because that's too much to admit, right?
Yeah.
And so people will go in and try to make them feel better.
Yeah.
And sometimes they just want to feel crappy. They just
Yeah.
want to say, hey, I'm dying and this really sucks.
Yeah.
And so you're that person who sits there and says, yeah, this really sucks for you, and I'm sorry about that. But
Yeah.
you know, we understand what that.
There's a time to laugh
And
there's
a time to cry. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a time to cry sometimes.
Absolutely.
And there can be also times to laugh during those times.
Oh my Lord, you have no idea.
Yeah.
No idea.
And you're allowed to laugh at anything at that time. There's no pretense, I'm sure.
It's interesting because I do this, like I've been dealing with death and dying for a very long time, and people who don't know me or know what we do, they'll go, how could you work? That's so depressing. And I think, oh, you have no idea what goes on in the hospice room sometimes. We last week.
I bet you got a story.
Sorry.
No. I'm hoping.
Last week we had a wedding. It was the best wedding I ever been to.
Did Chris Gabart do that wedding?
No, I officiated.
Did you?
Oh my word, did I ever.
Wow,
It was
that's
the
awesome.
best. And it was.
I asked about Chris because he actually officiated a wedding, I think 2 weeks ago, and the groom had
Cancer?
he had
Yeah.
cancer, I think. He was
Yeah.
he doesn't have that much time left, and he did the wedding. So tell me about the wedding.
Oh, we had a
wedding
riot.
in hospice.
In hospice. So hospice has this beautiful place called April's Garden, and it's a conservatory with lots of windows and just enough to hold a nice group of people. And we had the daughter of one of our residents want to get married, and and so we did this ceremony, and I did
Fantastic.
the first thing I have never done this before. I've never officiated at a ceremony before,
Right.
but we did hand fasting, which was amazing. And so
Hand fasting?
hand fasting, if you've ever seen, it's a Celtic tradition, but it's done through all kinds of different cultures.
Okay.
And you have bride and groom just put their hands on top of each other, and then I used 3 cords, each of a different color. One represented her, one him, and one their marital bond. And then the way I wrapped it, they pulled the cord and pulled their hands out, and what happened, it turned into an infinity knot. And then and it was so cool, and they were so happy with it. I was just so pleased.
The parent was able to witness that wedding.
Yeah, and it was her dream, right? It was her wish. So that was just an amazing thing, and it was the funniest. It was the best wedding I've ever been to. Oh, people were laughing and just enjoying themselves, and it was so nice to see. You know, we've had ponies visit. I had a miniature pony brought in to visit room to room. It's been fun.
Oh, really? Room to room?
Yeah, room to
Inside,
room.
not even
Inside.
outside of the
Of course,
balcony?
was like yay big.
Wow.
It was tiny. It was beautiful.
So that makes me think about what would I want.
Good.
Yeah.
And you know, when you ask what is your vision for, it's that making people think about what is it that you want when it's your time, and not when we're in the crisis,
Right.
but before the crisis.
Right.
That's the important part, having these conversations with our loved ones.
I think gnocchi with some lobster. That's where I'm at.
Oh, I can make a mean lobster
All right.
sauce.
I love lobster.
Gnocchi lobster.
Yes.
Daniel. I got it.
Put a sticky note in the file.
I got it. I'm there.
When someone is diagnosed like that, is it important for them to let others know? Or is that more of a personal preference? I've heard of some people keeping their diagnosis private and not wanting to tell anybody. But I don't really know how I feel about that. And I was wondering what you thought.
So I encourage people to share their feelings, their emotions, their fears, their concerns, their love, what they want to say to someone. I encourage that. But there are people, like you said, who don't want to. Some people don't even want to be told anything about their medical situation at all. And so it goes to, they want the family to deal with it.
Right.
So again, we meet people where they're at. Some cultures in particular, they don't want their mom to know that she has cancer, and that's what she's like. We've been asked, don't tell her she has this, and it's like, yeah, okay, but
Right.
And it's interesting because what'll happen is families will think, oh, she doesn't know. and then they'll pretend, and then when the family leaves,
what's the point of that?
but when
You're
the family
trying to
leaves,
protect.
they're protecting. They don't
Yeah.
want them to be sad because they'll give up hope. I heard that a lot. They
Okay.
give up hope. But then when the family leaves, you know what the residents and the patients say to me?
What's that?
I know I'm dying. I don't want my family to be upset. Don't tell them.
Everyone's trying to protect.
Everybody's
each
trying, and so you miss that authentic opportunity to really share what you
Mm-hmm.
feel about one another, to have those moments, you know, that mean a lot to people, especially at the end.
I think we in society, we like to put, not everybody, but we like to put a face on a lot of times, right?
Oh, for sure.
And we don't really like to let other people know what we're going through,
Right.
whatever it might be. I have a really close friend, and one of the first times I met him, it was actually the second time I met him, he said, "How you doing, Daniel?" And I said, "Oh, I'm good." He's like, "No, nope, if you're gonna answer like that, I'm not even gonna be your friend." I was like, "What?" And he goes, you be honest with me, like completely honest, because I want an honest friendship."
Aw.
And I was like, wow.
That's
And
a
now
good friend.
him and I are like close.
That's a good friend.
Close friends. And I wasn't exactly used to that because it's so easy just to say, "I'm good, yeah, I'm good."
Sure.
And we just move on, and then it's a shallow friendship.
Exactly.
Where being able to divulge what you're feeling, first of all, helps you.
Yeah.
And it helps that relationship grow deeper. So I know you can't force somebody to do something
Right.
like that, but to give them your professional counsel and advice to say, you know what,
Always encourage.
be open and honest. And it's not easy to be open and honest,
Right.
but it's really important, right?
And sometimes we facilitate that. Sometimes it's easier when I'm in the room or someone in, you know, the social worker's in the room,
Right.
to have that conversation because we're that
Yeah.
third party that can ask the questions, that
dig a
open
little
that,
bit,
yeah.
yeah.
And so it's easier for them. But, you know, like you said, some people want to share it and some people don't. And so
Right.
again, we meet them where they're at. We'll journey with you the way that you need to be journeyed with.
Yeah.
Right?
I think, yeah, that's awesome. And I think going back to that, sometimes the person not sharing what they're going through can actually make the struggle more difficult, because then the people who love them maybe aren't able to get beside them and share that burden with them.
Exactly. Yeah.
So-
It's an interesting dynamic when you see both sides playing the same thing, and you think, and I often say to families, like they say, they don't know, and I'm like, no, they know.
Yeah.
Well, how do you know? Because
That's
they've
like-
talked to
that's
me
like
about
kids,
it.
Right?
Right.
Kids, people want to protect kids all day long, every day.
That's right.
And of course, and I often am giving families counsel, and they say, well, we're going to leave the kids at home for the funeral. And I say, don't. What do you mean don't? Well, we don't want them to see a dead body. We don't want them to know what happened. And I'm like, they know.
Absolutely.
They see the grieving in the room. They feel the sadness. And if they're left out, or they're not allowed to be part of that, that can be a struggle for them.
Absolutely.
And we want to always protect them, but they can handle a lot more than we give them credit for.
Absolutely.
And I find in my observation that the parent's fear is generally placed onto the child, and the child, if left by themselves, often is very accepting of what's going on, and they will feel the sorrow, they'll mourn, they'll feel the sadness, but they can go up and go to the casket. They might not want to touch or approach, but they will.
Absolutely.
But then if the parent is petrified,
Yeah.
and they're shaking and they're holding the child all of a sudden it's like, now I have to be afraid.
Absolutely.
Something's very scary, right?
Absolutely.
And I would imagine you would face some of the similar things.
Yeah, like some people will say, well, we don't want to bring the kids to hospice, and you know, why not?
Yeah.
You know, because when they do come,
It brings such a good presence to the situation as well.
absolutely.
Because I've brought my girls, I have now almost 4 and 5, they were 3 and 4. I've brought them to a funeral visitation before of a friend of mine, and some people would be like, oh, definitely leave your kids at home. I bring my girls.
Absolutely.
And they bring so much, they bring comfort to the room just by
They
being
do.
there.
Isn't that the truth? That
Yeah.
that innocent
Yeah.
energy that
It
comes
just
with.
helps people like it melts people down.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
They feel comfortable now.
And like there's nothing wrong with sharing the information about death and dying with kids at age appropriate stages,
Yes,
right? So
yeah.
you don't have to tell them all the gory details, but just say,
course.
This is what's happening, and kids are resilient, like you said.
And you have to be honest.
And you have to be honest, because they sniff out dishonesty really quickly.
And you have to be a little bit blunt with them.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yes.
Because if you beat around the bush,
they're like,
huh?
Yeah.
What do you mean? And they'll ask the questions. I actually I forget exactly what happened, but I was talking to my nephew once, and I was beating around the bush, and he looked at me and he's like, "What do you mean?" And then I'm like, "Why am I beating around the bush?" So I just told him directly, and he goes, "Oh, okay." And it was just like he accepted it.
Yeah, they're amazing. Kids are just amazing when it comes to grief, and just you work in the funeral industry. Society in general, what do? We institutionalize everything.
Yes.
Before it used to be part of our lives. Our great-grandparents, our grandparents, they lived with us. They lived and died in our homes.
Yes.
And so
visitings in the homes.
Exactly.
In the homes
and now we medicalized everything. It's all institutionalized,
right.
and it's removed from the natural part. And so if I can do anything in like you asked about what's your vision?
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we normalize death and dying. That it's not something to be afraid of or worry about. Bring awareness to it. So the death cafes and those kinds of things that are really important to talk about. And
it's funny. Some funeral professionals cringe at those things. And they say, well, you can't let the public know the secrets. And I'm like,
what secrets?
What secrets? There's no secrets.
We live and die. That's not a secret.
This is part of life.
Interesting.
It's the most tragic part of life, and people need to face it and to think about it.
Interesting you said it's a tragic part of life, because I will be honest with you, before I used to teach high school. So before I went into healthcare and this dealing with the dying, I was terrified of funerals, of dying people, of everything. My experience, my first death, it really taught me a lot. And it was that there are so many beautiful things that happen in the dying process.
That's true.
So many amazing reconciliations. You can walk into some of our rooms and you feel the love that's in that room from families. It's the most. It sounds strange, but it is a beautiful process, and it is an honor to be at that death with that family, and it is to be part of that, to watch the sacredness of conversations, to watch forgiveness, to watch the flow of emotion and love that comes out. It's so powerful, and we don't get that because we kind of push it over there, right? But if you see that, it has changed my entire viewpoint on life. It has changed. The person who would stand at the back of the funeral home and cry and be terrified now is like holding people who are dying, because the honor of doing that, it changes you. It really does.
So can you tell us of a particular experience that you've had personally that has affected your perspective in life?
I think the thing that most changed how I approach life, I started working at the cancer center. And I was terrified of death and dying. People who were dying were like, oh no, I couldn't go to a funeral home. I would cry, I would be like shaking at the back. But once I started working there, I saw, this is gonna sound bizarre, but how beautiful death and dying could be. And I witnessed people going through the most difficult times in their lives, yet filled with so much love and beauty and emotion. And I think that the very first death that I experienced working at the cancer center really changed how I approached life, and that you have to live every day as if it is your last. Like,
can you tell us about that?
About the
very
death?
first experience that you had?
So it was, I had been assigned to this patient to do healing touch, because there was nothing else they could do for them.
What is healing touch?
It is a complementary therapy. I learned it because my mom had migraines since she was 9, and I tried to help her help with her pain and her migraines. But Dr. Yoshida, who worked at the cancer center, was a big proponent of these not alternative, but complementary therapies. The body, mind, spirit kind of connection. And so basically it's a technique that you use that really relaxes the person it can help with pain, and whether it's placebo or not, I don't know.
Right.
Well, I do know because we did some research in it, but
Right.
that was meant to help. And this particular person wasn't able to eat, and he was having difficulty breathing, and so I was trying to alleviate that anxiety around that.
Okay.
And I remember his last day there, like treating him on his last day, and I had gotten very close to him, and all I kept thinking is, oh my God, he's going to die. He's going to die. And I wasn't, but his death was so peaceful that I was expecting to be overly emotional and like, oh, he died. But it was almost
natural.
Peace. There was a sacredness in the room I can't even begin to describe. It was very sacred. It was calm. It was peaceful. And it just made me feel like, oh, this is so much bigger than what we are here. There is something else. And
that really changed your perspective.
That changed my perspective.
Yeah, from being afraid of that dead body over there.
Yeah, exactly.
To embracing the...
Like, wow, this was beautiful.
Wow.
And it was a weird event because it wasn't expected. It was almost like I felt there was something divine in the room, and I know that sounds very airy-fairy, but there was almost something. It was a sacred moment, and from that point on, I tried not to let things. Guy cut me off in traffic. I'm not swearing at him anymore, and so every day, every moment, and everybody's got their story. So I don't know what you're going through,
right?
And maybe less judgmental in some ways too.
True.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing. So what would you say? What kind of counsel would you give to people about mending relationships at the end of life? Because, I'm in the funeral industry, and you have the honor and privilege of seeing people to the end, I think, and I have the honor and privilege of walking people past that stage. Right. But when they're with me, they wouldn't have had that opportunity, or that opportunity there is complete.
Yeah.
You can still, I do think seeing your loved one after they've passed and having that time can give you that opportunity to be able to say something and to have some more closure, which is really good. But to the people who aren't at that stage yet, who are before that stage, what kind of advice would you give them about mending their relationships around them? Because I know we all have broken relationships.
For sure, every family has. So, usually if those kinds of conversations, sometimes they'll share that, like, I haven't talked to my brother in 15 years or 20 years. Right. And mostly what I do is ask questions around that.
Okay.
So you had a falling out. Would you like to speak with him? Is there something that we can do to make sure that we can get him here? Would you like to? So I kind of like I said before, we kind of meet them where they're at.
Right.
And if they make the choice to say, yeah, you know what, I would really like to, then we'll facilitate that. We can either make the call, help them saying, he wants to see you, or we, and if sometimes people, like in all situations, sometimes people don't want to mend any fences. Right. And
what if that brother really, really wants to mend that, but the other person does? I'm sure you see all kinds of situations.
So we've had situations where the brother who hasn't talked to someone in 30 years is wanting to come and now visit the dying person, right? And the dying person saying, no, absolutely not. Right. In that case, the client, the patient, the resident is our concern, and so we would honor that. But we've had cases where people wanted to reach out to someone and have a conversation and forgive them, and that person just never responded to a text or. So then
what could they do? Maybe writing a letter?
Yeah, so the next thing is, do you want to write them a letter? Right. Do you want to just kind of write out what you would say to them, and then if at some point your family can deliver to them, they will.
That's good. And for all those watching or listening, do it today while you can. Try to mend those relationships, because you don't want to get to the end of your life with a burden of those broken relationships.
True.
So that's one thing that I've learned in funeral services. One of my strongest lessons has been to try to make peace with all people as much as possible, because you get to the end and it's just so much more turmoil, and we won't be able to mend every relationship, of course.
Absolutely not.
But do what we can to do that.
Ira Bayok he's a palliative care physician, I think in California or in the States somewhere, but a guru in the area. And he said there's like 5 different things, and I don't think I'll remember all 5, but one of them is, the 5 things that people want at the end of life to say, I love you, I forgive you, do you forgive me? Those are the kinds of things that we need to ask about, and it's very simple, right?
Yeah.
Short, simple. I love you. I forgive you. Do you forgive me?
Right.
I forget the other 2, but
sounds healing.
Yes.
Sounds healing.
Yes.
And important. I think that's a lot of why you and I, our passion is to bring some healing to the situations in the community that we find ourselves in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What would it look like to prepare oneself for death when we get that diagnosis? Like, what kind of advice could you give on that?
Keep asking me about advice, but I don't give advice.
Yeah.
I've learned early in life not to give advice.
Good. And I appreciate that about you. I'm learning.
I don't know if you can ever prepare for death, because it's something you've never experienced, so you don't know what it's going to be like, right? I think that preparing for death, when someone comes to hospice, for example, they're fantastic at giving educational materials, of telling them what to expect, of knowing what's, this is the trajectory of your illness, this is what it looks like. And so that's a type of preparation, right? Yeah. One of the things that I really appreciate about hospice is that they will share with family and the loved one, these are the things, these are the different stages that, and what you're seeing is quite normal, because when you experience it, you've never seen anyone dying before, it's terrifying. But the change in breathing, that's quite normal, that happens. They're not in pain. What you're hearing is a gurgling sound, because they're not clearing the mucus out of their throat, but we think it's this gasping that they can't breathe, and that's not what it is. So there's this preparation in terms of education, of reaffirming everything, of letting them know that this is normal. But can I'll be honest with you, I worked in this area for a very long time. When it was my dad's turn, when my dad was dying, right? Yeah. I've been doing this and thinking, I got this, I got this. When my dad died, I was like a deer in headlights. I couldn't think if I couldn't tell you anything about the whole process, the theory, the training, all out the window. Wow. And I was just a daughter that was grieving at that point.
Was someone able to be there and walk by your side through that you would remember?
I can't say there was, because I think the problem with being in this area is that people expect you to
you're the one
to do it, right? You're the one who knows what's going on. So I'll be honest, I faked it till I made it. Like, it was just like I just kept pretending like I knew, and I knew nothing at that moment. I couldn't even think straight, to be honest with you. So preparing is the person themselves. It's interesting to watch people go through the process. At first they may come in, they're not really accepting, then they're at the point where they're accepting, and then it's an interesting process to watch, because people become. I haven't seen a lot of people fight till the very, very end. I usually see an acceptance and a gentle kind of way of kind of going into that state where they're no longer responsive.
It's interesting how we have to remind ourselves how certain things are normal.
Yeah.
And I remind people going through the grieving process that certain things are normal, and it's comforting to them to hear that.
Well, again,
because they haven't gone through it.
Yeah, we've never experienced it. So I hear that all the time. Like, even with the emotional roller coaster that people go through, whether it's the family or the resident, I feel like I'm going crazy. I hear that a lot, and it's like, no, you're normal. You're like, I am? This is normal? Yeah, this is normal. And just reaffirming that, normalizing the situation is really helpful to people. Really helpful to people.
Awesome. Now, being in this industry and working with death over the years, what would you say is good for us to kind of do in our everyday life? What can we do to kind of, I don't know, keep certain things at the front of our mind, maybe to prepare for each one of us is going to die.
Yeah. So
right?
one of the things that I've done in the community, and I've done for hospice as well, is I'm a facilitator for advanced care planning.
Okay.
And advanced care planning is basically having conversations with your family and your loved ones and your healthcare providers about what it is you do want and don't want. If you find yourself in a crisis, in a life-threatening situation, right? So if we can actually have conversations with our loved ones about, if that were to happen to you, what would you do? What would you want? And it's interesting because there's studies out there that talk about families think they know what the loved one wants. They really think they know. And then when they did the research, they looked at what the family thought the loved one wants and what they had conversations with the loved one and what they wanted, and they didn't always match up.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because the family I thought for sure that that's what they wanted, but no, they wanted something differently. Right. And so until you have those conversations, and I do these workshops, right, where we do the advanced care planning presentation, and then people come back and actually do the plan. We go through the whole booklet and we do a plan, and it's interesting to watch husband and wife.
I like that, yeah.
And they like, no, that's not what I want. That's not what you want. I thought that's what you want. No, I don't. And so there's this little argument going on about what they thought, and it's interesting.
Like the common wedding game where they sit the bride and groom back to back and each one holds a different shoe.
Yes, yeah.
And then, who's the one to start the first argument? And they'll put up the shoe, and you see how often they're different, or sometimes they're the same.
Yeah, but it's interesting. But yeah, I think that's a way to prepare.
Yeah, and something that comes to my mind when you talk about that is, I think it would also be really important for the family to express what they feel like they need as well.
Yes.
Because I find oftentimes with funeral pre-planning that the person will go in and pre-plan what they want with the funeral, and then when it comes to the time for the funeral, then the family goes, they plan this just very quick disposition, but we need more. We need more. So to have that advanced planning discussion with the family, and then you can say what your desire is, and then the family can say what they feel like their need is.
Exactly.
So that open communication can kind of open our eyes to preparing.
And like you've said, and we talked about before that, funerals aren't for the dead, it's for the living.
Yes.
And it's for us to be able to go through that process of beginning the grief process, right?
Very
the
important.
bereavement process.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, now is your chance to ask me, Daniel, the funeral director, anything that you like.
So I'm really interested in something called alkaline hydrolysis.
Okay.
And if it was ever coming to Windsor, or is there someone who does it in Windsor?
Okay. So for those of you who don't know what alkaline hydrolysis is, it's kind of a newer method of disposition. Some people would call it a water cremation. And that sounds kind of oxymoron because cremation's fire. But what it is, and I won't get all the right terminology because I don't own my own, but it's like a tank that you're laid into, and then there's water, and then an alkaline solution, which is the opposite of an acid solution. So it's an alkaline, like a very alkaline solution. And what happens is then heat and pressure is added, and it breaks down all the organic material. And then it takes a few hours, and sometimes there's a flow of water that's happening at the same time. And when that machine, that unit is all drained and opened up, then what's remaining in that unit is the skeletal remains.
So what do they do with those skeletal remains?
So very, very similar to the traditional cremation process with fire. What happens with the skeletal remains is they're broken down into like a powder, what you might call ashes, because that's actually what traditional cremated remains are, is the calcium deposits in the bones. And so with alkaline hydrolysis is those remains are broken down, and then you get actually a very white, a white batch. That's a
Like
bad
a
word for
sediment?
it. Of ashes. It's similar ashes. It's kind of
cool.
granular. So and you actually get about 30% more cremated remains than a traditional cremation would.
Why would that be done?
Probably. Well, the fire, I would imagine, consumes a bit more than the alkaline hydrolysis. It's known to be a more green solution because of the amount of fossil fuels that you're not using as much fossil fuels. And what is drained is organic material. So that's okay to go into the sewage system, and then you're left with the cremated remains. Just like, now I think there's about 3 alkaline hydrolysis in all of Ontario. It has been a bit of a bumpy road to get it legalized in Ontario, but it is now legalized in Ontario.
Oh wow.
Yep. I think the first guy, he got the okay, and then all of a sudden then they shut him down, and then he got opened up again, and now there's another one, and I know that there's at least 2, but none in Windsor. I don't know how soon one would be coming to Windsor because all the funeral homes in Windsor own their own crematoriums.
Okay.
So it would be an investment.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think it would be a worthwhile investment though, because then
it's a greener function, right?
Greener, and then you also give people a different option of disposition. So. And you can bring that urn. I think you have to get a bit of a bigger urn actually.
Oh wow!
Because of the 30% more. But you can bring that urn and you can do your celebration of life service still. You can have your visiting and funeral before that takes place and still have the ceremony. So everything the same as traditional cremation. Yeah.
Well, I'll hang on till it comes to Windsor.
Yeah. And actually, you're petting your pup over here.
Yeah, I have my little dog here.
And there is alkaline hydrolysis for pets as well. And because now the option is just traditional cremation.
Yeah.
But a gentleman in Strathroy has his own alkaline hydrolysis for pets specifically. They don't mix with the humans, it's just his own for pets. And so there's that option for pets too.
Okay, Baxter, don't listen, honey.
Yeah, sorry, Pop. she's okay with a human death, but not with pet death yet.
I just lost 2 last year, so it's kind of sad.
It's a sore spot going through healing.
But I got this baby now.
Yeah. So can you share with us something that you have going on in the community right now?
So one of the things we're starting in September that I'm kind of excited about is I noticed when people lose a loved one that I'm Italian, so food is important in my life, that when it comes to eating and cooking and food, and it has a lot of emotional baggage to it. So eating alone, shopping, eating badly because you don't know how to cook, so you order a lot of food out. So we're putting together something called Beyond the Plate, that is a combination of a bereavement group and a cooking class. So
kind of like a walking bereavement group, but with food. I like this.
Well, and please forgive me. I know bereavement groups are very important, and I agree with that. But I just find that when we're all sitting around in a circle and just looking at each other, it's hard to start talking. But I find that if there's an activity involved, like cooking, I'm sitting here chopping carrots, and then I start talking about my husband or my wife, or it's a different type of conversation that happens. And so by having the activity along with the actual discussion around grief and bereavement, it just becomes more organic. It's a more natural way of being, right?
I am going to claim chopping onions, so therefore I have an excuse
to be crying.
For crying.
I'm sure all the men will be chopping on the onions, right?
Yeah, chop some onions, guys.
And so we're starting that in September. It's a 4-week series, and we would do a little bit of discussion around, a little bit of education around grief and bereavement and what's normal, and how do you physically respond to grief and bereavement, like the lack of appetite, all those things around food, right?
Okay.
And then part of the session would be me teaching you. It'll be an Italian recipe. Sorry about that, but
I don't think you have to apologize.
A quick
Everyone
Italian recipe, like.
Are you going to do your cannoli?
I'm going to do cannelloni. I'm going, my Lazy Mary Cannelloni. I'm going to do the Italian wedding soup.
Okay.
Because everybody likes soup.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to do gnocchi.
Nice.
I'm going to do
Sounds good.
a couple of desserts, maybe
Awesome.
cannoli or tiramisu.
Very
Just all that
nice.
kind of stuff that you can like really enjoy.
So if someone's listening to this next year and September's already passed, they and they're associated with hospice,
Right.
They would be able to call in if the program's still running and be able to.
So September will be a pilot. We're going to
Okay.
kind of work out the kinks, see how it goes, and then we're hoping to run it every month or every other month.
Awesome! Wow.
And
that's
you
great.
would call intake, tell them that you want to be part of the Beyond the Plate cooking group, and they would sign you up, and you would come to the class, and we would go from
That's
there.
fantastic.
Yeah,
Well, thank
I'm
you for
looking
what you're
forward.
doing.
Oh, my pleasure. I appreciate
That's
being
awesome.
part of this.
Yeah, and thank you so much for joining me
Oh,
for this
fun.
conversation. I really appreciate it, and it's just you've given me a lot to think about. Just walking with people through what they're going through, or beside them, getting down and just being with them through their grief, through what they're going through. Also, that there is beauty in death.
Absolutely.
As unnatural as that sounds. I appreciate your experience, and I appreciate your view on that.
Thank you.
And I hope that one day when I experience something tragic, because I think we all mostly do, that this will come back to my memory to be able to look for the beautiful things that are also there.
Absolutely.
And and then the other things, like, it's not all about advice. I like to ask advice, but it's not all about advice. It's about that experience and just being there for each other.
We take the cue from the person, right?
Yeah. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining me on this conversation. And to all those who are listening, thank you for joining us for the Conversations with Daniel, a funeral director. Appreciate it. Bye.
Pleasure.
Awesome.